Let me start with something uncomfortably specific. You're lying in bed at night, phone face down, notifications quiet, and it hits you. Not loneliness exactly, but this weird mix of relief and shame. Relief because you didn't have to make plans you didn't want to keep. Shame because you think, is it normal that I don't really have friends? You replay moments from your life. Group chats you slowly stopped replying to. Invitations you declined once, then twice, then never got again. People who used to feel close, but now feel like strangers you'd have to pretend with. And at some point, you asked yourself the question you never say out loud. What if I'm the problem? If that landed a little too hard, stay with me. Because what if the reason you have few or no friends isn't that you're broken, antisocial, or emotionally stunted, but that you have traits most people don't? Rare ones, quiet ones, traits that don't play well with modern social life. Let me say this clearly, because no one ever said it to you. Not having friends is not the same as being incapable of connection. Sometimes it's the opposite. And the first trait, arguably the most misunderstood one, is this. You have almost zero tolerance for fake connection. Not fake people in the dramatic sense, not cartoon villains, just performative humans. Let me explain. The moment you started pulling away, even if you didn't notice. Think back to a time you were in a group conversation. Everyone's laughing, jokes flying, stories being exaggerated just enough to get a reaction. And you're sitting there thinking, why does this feel hollow? Nothing is technically wrong. No one's being mean, no one's doing anything offensive, but your body wants to leave before your brain can justify why. You smile, you nod, you play along, but inside, you're exhausted. And here's the key part most people miss. You're not bored because you're arrogant. You're drained because your brain is allergic to inauthenticity. That's not poetic language, that's psychology. Why your brain can't just go with the flow. Most social environments run on social lubrication, small talk, polite exaggeration, unspoken rules about what not to say. For many people, this stuff is harmless, even comforting. But for you, it feels like eating food with no nutritional value. You're full, but somehow still empty. Research on self-monitoring and authenticity shows something fascinating. As people become more self-aware and internally consistent, their tolerance for surface-level interaction drops sharply. Why? Because your brain isn't just listening to what people say, it's tracking why they're saying it. Tone mismatches, forced laughter, subtle status games, the gap between words and intention. You notice all of it. And once you notice it, you can't unnotice it. So when someone smiles but their energy says, I'm competing with you, when a conversation feels like a performance instead of a meeting, when connection feels conditional instead of real, your nervous system quietly checks out. Not in anger, in self-preservation. The loneliness paradox no one talks about. Here's the part that messes people up. You can feel lonelier in a room full of people than you do alone. Because loneliness isn't the absence of people. It's the absence of being seen. And shallow connection is actually worse for solitude for people like you. So you make a trade, often unconsciously. I'll accept fewer connections if it means the ones I have are real. The problem? Most of the world is optimized for quantity. Networking, social proof, follower counts. Who do you know? Depth is inefficient. Authenticity is slow. Real connection doesn't scale. Which means people like you don't just struggle socially, you're swimming against the current. The quiet standards you never announced. You never sat down and said, I demand authenticity. You didn't write a manifesto, but somewhere along the way, your standards formed. Unspoken rules like, if I can't be honest, I'd rather be silent. If I have to shrink myself, I'll leave. If I feel manipulated, I'm gone. If connection costs my peace, it's too expensive. So you stop tolerating things other people shrug off, Gossip, passive aggression, fake enthusiasm, friendships built on convenience instead of care. To others, it looks like you're distant. To you, it feels like you're finally breathing. But doesn't everyone hate fake people? Sure, in theory, but here's the difference. Most people can tolerate fake moments for the sake of belonging. You can't. Your brain doesn't file it under social necessity. It files it under emotional dishonesty. And emotional dishonesty triggers the same stress responses as actual conflict. That's why you don't warm up over time. That's why forcing yourself makes it worse, not better. That's why you'd rather be alone than mildly connected. You're not being dramatic. Your system is just calibrated differently. The mislabel you've probably internalized. At some point, someone implied or straight up told you that you're too quiet, too serious, too picky, too guarded, too hard to get close to. And maybe you believed them. But here's the reframe. You're not hard to get close to, you're hard to fake with. That's a completely different thing. People who rely on masks feel exposed around you. People who perform feel uncomfortable. People who haven't met themselves yet don't know what to do with you. So they drift, or you do, and suddenly you're the one with no friends. A question I want you to sit with. Let me interrupt the pattern for a second. Be honest with yourself. Would you rather have 10 friends who don't really know you, or one person you don't have to edit yourself around? If that answer was instant, that tells me everything. Because people with this trait aren't avoiding connection. They're waiting for the right frequency. What this means going forward. If this first trait resonates, here's what I want you to hear before we move on. Your solitude is not a failure state. Your standards are not arrogance. Your discomfort in shallow spaces is data, not a defect. But this trait doesn't exist alone. It usually comes bundled with others, ones that make social life feel even more complicated and even more misunderstood. Let me guess how most conversations go for you. Someone asks, "So, what's new?" And your brain freezes. Not because you have nothing to say, but because there are too many true answers, and none of them fit into that question. Do you say, "Not much," which is technically a lie, or open the door to how you've been rethinking your entire life, your purpose, and the way time seems to be slipping through your fingers? So you choose the safe option. You keep it light, you keep it short, and the conversation dies a quiet, awkward death. Then later, alone, you replay it and think, why am I like this? Here's the thing most people never realize. You're not bad at conversation. You're bad at pretending conversation is the point. The hidden cost of shallow interaction. Small talk exists to signal safety. It says, I'm not a threat, you're not a threat. We're good. For many people, that's enough. But your brain doesn't stop there. You don't want to talk around life, you want to talk about it. Why people are the way they are. What actually makes someone happy. What scares us but we never admit. Why certain memories stick and others disappear. And when a conversation stays on the surface too long, something in you shuts down. Not in arrogance, in starvation. A story you'll recognize instantly. Think about the rare moments you felt socially alive. Not energized, alive. It probably wasn't at a party, or during group banter, or in a loud room with overlapping voices. It was likely a 2 a.m. conversation with one person. A walk where time disappeared. A moment when someone said, I've never told anyone this before. Your body relaxed, your thoughts sharpened, you felt present. That's not coincidence. That's how your brain is wired. The psychology behind deep-seeking minds. Research on deep processors, people who naturally analyze meaning, emotion, and pattern, shows something important. They experience cognitive friction during shallow interaction. In plain English, your brain wants signal. Small talk is mostly noise. You're constantly asking, what does this mean? Why does this matter? Where is this going? And when there's no answer, your system disengages. This is why you hate repeating the same conversations. You don't enjoy catching up just for the sake of it. You'd rather talk about one real thing than 10 random ones. It's not that you lack social skills. Your threshold for meaning is just higher. Why this makes you look quiet. From the outside, people think you're reserved. But inside, your mind is loud. It's just selective. You don't jump in unless the conversation is going somewhere. And in a world optimized for speed, volume, and constant stimulation, that reads as silence. The loneliness that comes from thinking too deeply. Here's the painful part no one warns you about. Deep-seeking people often feel chronically misunderstood. Not because others don't care, but because most interactions never reach the layer where you live. So you adapt. You simplify yourself. You summarize your thoughts. You keep the deeper stuff to yourself. And over time, you start feeling like, no one actually wants to know me. But the truth is more subtle and more hopeful. Most people just don't know how to meet you there. A question that changes everything. Let me ask you something. Don't answer out loud. Just notice the feeling. When was the last time a conversation left you feeling expanded, not drained? If you had to think for more than a second, that explains a lot. Because people with this trait don't need many connections. They need one that goes deep enough. Why you'd rather be alone than understimulated. Solitude for you isn't empty. It's rich. Your inner world is active, curious, self-sustaining. So when social interaction doesn't match that depth, it feels like a downgrade. You're not avoiding people. You're avoiding intellectual and emotional malnourishment. And once you realize that, being alone stops feeling like a flaw and starts feeling like a form of self-respect. Where this trait can turn against you. There is a shadow side, and we need to be honest about it. Depth can become a wall. If no one ever feels deep enough, you might isolate yourself more than you intend to. You might miss people who could grow with you if given time and patience. Not everyone reveals depth immediately. Some people need safety before they open. This doesn't mean you lower your standards. It means you stay open without betraying yourself. We'll come back to this later. Let's pause here. If this part hit, I want you to reflect on one thing before moving on. Are you alone because you dislike people or because you refuse to water yourself down? Sit with that. Because in the next part, we're going to talk about the third trait, the one rooted in your nervous system. The reason socializing doesn't just feel boring or shallow, but physically exhausting.
Let me describe something and see if your body reacts before your brain does. You spend a few hours socializing. Nothing dramatic. No conflict, no awkward moments. You even enjoyed parts of it. But when you finally get home, you don't want to talk. You don't want to scroll. You don't even want music. You want silence. Not because you're sad, not because you're angry, but because you feel fried. Like your brain just ran a marathon it never trained for. And you think, why does this drain me so much when other people seem fine? Here's the truth most people never learn. Your exhaustion isn't social. It's neurological. This isn't introversion, at least not the way people think. People love to slap labels on this. Oh, you're just an introvert. You just don't like people. You just need to get out more. But that explanation is lazy. Because you can enjoy people, you can connect deeply, and you can even be charismatic in the right setting. The issue isn't people. It's processing load. The sensitive nervous system no one talks about. Some people have what psychologists call high sensory and social sensitivity. In plain English, your brain doesn't filter as aggressively. You take in tone shifts, facial microexpressions, emotional undercurrents, subtle tension. who's uncomfortable, who's trying too hard, who's not being honest. All of it, automatically. While others are just hanging out, your nervous system is doing background calculations non-stop. And every calculation costs energy. Why conversations feel like work, even when you like the person? Here's something that might surprise you. You don't get tired during the interaction. You get tired after. Because while you're present, your system is in performance mode, tracking, adjusting, responding thoughtfully, staying regulated. Then, when it's over, your body finally says, "Okay, shut it all down." That's why you need alone time, quiet rooms, no stimulation, no expectations, not as a luxury, as recovery. The extrovert comparison that messed you up. At some point, you watched someone socialize all day, go to a party, then go out again, then text friends afterward. And you thought, what is wrong with me? Nothing. Their nervous system gains energy from stimulation. Yours spends it. Same activity, opposite effect. Judging yourself by their capacity is like blaming a phone for needing to be charged. Why this pushes you toward fewer friends? Here's the logical outcome no one explains. If social energy is limited, you become selective. You start asking, consciously or not, is this interaction worth the cost? Will I recover easily from this? Does this feel safe enough to spend energy on? And suddenly, you're not antisocial. You're economical. You invest where the return is real, and that naturally shrinks your circle. The quiet burnout you didn't realize you had. Many people with this trait aren't lonely. They're overstimulated and under-recovered. They pushed themselves for years, saying yes, showing up, forcing energy they didn't have. Until one day, their system said, no more. So they withdrew, not as rejection, as healing. A question worth sitting with. Let me interrupt again. When you avoid social plans, ask yourself this, not with guilt, just curiosity. Am I avoiding people or protecting my nervous system? The answer matters. Because once you understand this trait, shame loses its grip. The mistake to avoid. Here's the danger. When you realize solitude feels better than overstimulation, you might swing too far. Solitude can feel safe, predictable, controlled. But humans still need connection, just regulated connection. The goal isn't withdrawal. It's intentional contact. We'll talk about how to do that later. Let's pause here. If this part hit you, it probably explains a lot. Why you cancel plans, why you disappear for days, why people think you're distant, why solitude feels like oxygen. In the next part, we're going to talk about trait number 4, the one that makes you look emotionally detached, but is actually a sign of deep internal stability. The trait that explains why you don't chase validation, and why that confuses people.
Here's a truth most people misunderstand about you. They see you sitting quietly. They see you declining invitations. They see you making choices without asking anyone for approval. And they think, why is this person so cold, so distant? But what they don't see is the strength behind it. The reason you don't chase validation isn't apathy, it's self-sufficiency. Why you don't need everyone's approval. Let me ask you something. When someone praises you, does it feel like fuel or just background noise? Most people rely on approval to feel good. You don't. You entertain yourself. You motivate yourself. You reassure yourself. Psychology calls this low social dependency. In plain English, your brain isn't wired to require external reinforcement to feel secure. You create your own world, your own meaning, your own standard for success. This is why you're selective about who gets access to your life. It's not snobbery, it's self-preservation and clarity. A story you'll recognize. Think of a moment when someone tried to convince you to act a certain way. Maybe they suggested you should fit in, or join the crowd, or stop overthinking social norms. And you didn't. You politely declined, or ignored it, or just did things your way. And inside, you felt fine, even powerful. Because validation isn't what drives you. You drive yourself. The shadow side, misunderstood as distant. Here's the tricky part. Other people often misinterpret this independence as coldness or arrogance, or worse, they think you don't like people. But that's rarely true. Your internal compass is simply strong enough that you don't need constant calibration from others. And when combined with the first 3 traits we covered, intolerance for fake connection, preference for depth, social sensitivity, this independence can make you seem like a lone island. But the truth is, you're not avoiding people. You're avoiding compromise that costs your peace. Why your circle is small but powerful. Because you don't need approval, you also don't tolerate shallow relationships. You don't maintain friends out of obligation. You don't perform to stay included. You don't bend to fit in. This creates a paradox. Your circle may be small, but every connection you have is intentional, meaningful, and often transformative. People who really understand this trait often feel a rare trust and intimacy with you, even if there aren't many of them. The misstep to avoid. Some people misread this independence and assume they need to force people to be more social. Don't. Your strength isn't a flaw. It's not a wall. It's a filter. People who truly belong in your life will meet you on your terms, not the world's. The hidden gift of independence. Here's something I want you to feel deeply. Being independent like this gives you something almost nobody else has. You are your own safe place. You can entertain yourself, think freely, recover quickly, and act intentionally. Your emotional life doesn't rely on external scaffolding. In a way, your brain is wired for autonomy and self-respect, and that is incredibly rare. By now, you've probably recognized a pattern. You can't stand fake connection. You crave depth over small talk. Socializing drains your nervous system faster than most. You're fiercely independent and don't need external validation. And yet, there's one last piece of the puzzle that explains why your circle is so small, and why your trust comes with a high price. Why trust feels like a rare currency. Think back. Maybe it was a friend who betrayed you, a relationship where someone pretended to care but didn't, or a family situation that taught you caution early. Whatever it was, your brain learned an important lesson. Not everyone deserves access to your inner world. Psychology calls this a trust threshold. Once someone breaks trust, your system becomes selective. Your brain now screens interactions for honesty, reliability, and emotional safety before you even start to let someone in. And that's a good thing. It's not that you're bitter, cold, or incapable of love. It's that your mind evolved to protect your peace. The cost of being burned before. Here's the uncomfortable truth. When trust is broken, the brain rewires. You notice subtle manipulation instantly. You evaluate motives constantly. You test people longer than others do. That's why you might seem guarded, distant, or slow to connect. But that caution is your superpower. Because while others may leap into shallow relationships, you carefully build ones that actually last. Why your small circle is actually a strength. Let's connect the dots. You're not bad at friendship. You're not antisocial. You simply operate with more awareness, sensitivity, and standards than most. Your friendships are small but deep, selective but loyal, rare but transformative. And the people lucky enough to earn your trust often become your lifelong allies. A reframe for your mind. Here's what I want you to feel. Having few friends isn't a flaw. It's a sign that your mind works differently. You notice subtlety others miss. You feel deeply, even when it's quiet. You protect your energy like a scarce resource. You connect only when it truly matters. And that's a rare form of strength.
the big picture. When you put all 5 traits together, it becomes clear. You have zero tolerance for fake people. You crave depth over surface-level socializing. Your nervous system needs more recovery time. You're fiercely independent, self-sufficient, and free of validation seeking. Your past experiences sharpen your trust, making it selective. These traits aren't defects. They're part of a rare personality profile, sensitive, introspective, and high-functioning in ways most people will never understand. Sometimes, the most brilliant, self-aware, and resilient minds walk alone for a while. And that's okay, because when you understand yourself, you stop asking, "Why don't I have friends?" Instead, you start asking, "Which relationships are actually worth my energy?" And that question, it's far more powerful than having a crowd of acquaintances. Closing thought. So if you've ever felt misunderstood, lonely, or pressured to just be normal, here's the truth. You're not broken. You're rare. You're operating on a different frequency. And when the right people match that frequency, your connection will feel profound, unshakable, and life-affirming. If you want more videos like this, ones that explain your personality in ways school never did, hit subscribe. Because understanding yourself is the first step to never settling for shallow connection again.